Ian Smith is Director of Accessibility Platforms and Solutions at Code Mantra. Ian is joining us from India, so thank you so much it must be in the middle of the evening for you. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Todd.
We can see your slides, can hear you fine. You're ready to go.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here. And I'd like to start off speaking about document accessibility audits. You know, I am from Code Mantra. We're a service and a platforms company. And, you know, I want to present and discuss a couple use cases that we faced challenges on, which then led us to develop some technology. And then I'll also get into some tips and advice for those that are creating documents and how to make them more accessible, just through a few small tips and tricks. So when we first started providing accessibility services, you know, this use case I'll describe is we were asked to perform an audit of about 1,000 PDF files. At the time, this is about 6 years ago, and we had to use Adobe Acrobat, you know, or some other third-party tool. And in order to complete that request, you know, we had to deploy 10 operators or 10 staff members for roughly a week to audit each of these files individually, and then consolidate all of that information into a single audit report. And that's not sustainable. That's not efficient or effective for anyone. And so, you know, we developed a platform to take care of this, which really is scalable, and it helped us and it can help others as well. So several documents in a cloud-based solution can be validated in one massive chunk, if you will. But then you're presented with the details about that document. Any format, PDF, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, but you get to see where your problems lie. Is it the alt text? Is it more of the structure or the document properties that may be causing some of these problems? As much as Bethan was kind of talking about the design and the document and the things that we take for granted as visual readers, looking at this page, we understand how to read that particular document. Nothing is explicitly telling us that corporate law and accountability is the title. We just know that because it's big, bold, it's at the top. We also know that the boxed text in the lower left is meant to be read in isolation. We only know that because we see the box and we understand that through the various, you know, years and amount of reading that we have done. We also understand how to navigate the multi-column text flow. All of these visual cues are what we take for granted, again, as visual and sighted readers. But when a document is presented to a user that is not compliant, they have a very different experience. But we needed to develop a platform to make the remediation itself. So here I'm speaking about fixing existing documents, and the necessary thing to make the document accessible is to determine the structure and the reading order. Because if that does not exist, then what, again, the users of these or the consumers of these documents, they get much of what's on the left is an unstructured, flat document that is nothing more than a string of text. And if you think a moment about how we consume content today, a lot of us are seeking information, bits and pieces. Unless you're reading a novel for leisure, you know, again, we're searching for information. And users of assistive technologies are not able to do that with these documents in a non-compliant state. They're not able to navigate the list of headings. They're not able to pull up a list of URLs. So all of the ways that we would consume the content, they're left without that unless it's structured and made fully compliant. PDF, I'll talk about it specifically for a moment. PDF is excellent at what it was originally created for, which was to preserve the look and the feel of the document and be able to be very portable, hence its name, portable document format. Later, as we all know, Adobe modified the standard or the specification for PDF and allowed that structure then to be embedded, which obviously helps and assists assistive technologies read that document. But the tool itself is a little daunting and challenging for someone that doesn't necessarily have a techie type of background. The left-hand side image here shows the tag structure. It's very, again, it seems a little overwhelming. It's HTML-like or XML-like. So for someone that's not familiar with that type of coding or technology, they'll likely not be sure what they need to do to make these documents accessible. We were in that same situation as a service supplier, and we needed to be able to bring our staff on board quickly and make it easy for them to do the structuring that's required to make these documents accessible. And so that's a snapshot on the right-hand side. Taking, a little bit from Word, just having common the styling that you would do. You don't have to know the technical nuances of creating a tag structure, but rather tell me that this is a heading 1, a 2, a paragraph, a quote, and whatnot. The software itself takes care of the technical nuances to build that structure. Similarly, documents have a lot of alt text in some cases, or require alternative text versions. A use case I'll describe here is for a very large educational publisher. They had student supplements and instructors manuals that had on the upwards of 78,000 images and nearly 1 million equations. And equations in PDFs need alternative descriptions, actual text for those equations. And if you could imagine 1 million equations, generating a description is one Herculean effort, but also then inserting them into the PDF is another. So our platform is able to assist in that way. It provides a user interface for the content expert, because I truly believe subject matter experts are the best ones to generate appropriate text descriptions. I usually tell the story that I'm not a chemist. I would do a very poor job of writing an alternative text version for some chemical diagram. So, but giving them an easy way to do this task. Again, if we went back to the Adobe view, they would need to enter into that tag structure and know where to put that description. Same situation our staff had. So in developing this platform, they have a nice visual representation of the document on the right side and a workspace to enter in the descriptions on the left. But creating accessible documents, we all use Word or some other sort of document processing. And the biggest mistake that people do is what I would refer to as local formatting. They'll key in the text, and then they use what I have highlighted as a void. They select a font, the font size, make it big, make it bold, make it italic, make it look like a heading, but indeed it's not. It's really just another paragraph. When you get into the technical parts of it, it's really just another paragraph like every other in the document. Because again, they're They're leaning on the visual cues that we can see. That does not help any assistive technology, though, because it doesn't see those visual attributes. Rather, it needs the structural attributes that are typically applied through the use of, in this case, words built-in styles. You can build your own custom styles as well, but I've highlighted here, there's an outline level. I'm sure many of us have probably looked at the outline view within Word. If we were writing a lengthy paper, that is truly what these assistive technologies will look for as well. They look for the outline level to give that end user a list of the headings so that we can consume that content again in the same way that a visual sighted user would. So the recommendation here is to avoid the types of local formatting that you would typically do, but rather use the built-in features. Another instance is lists, making sure that when you build a list, use the list feature instead of tab, some character, and then tab again, and then your text. That's just a bunch of characters. It's not truly telling these assistive technologies that that user is entering into a list. And therefore, it's not able to tell them how many list items are in this list. So make use of what's there and try and avoid that local formatting if at all possible. And this is what I was referring to in the outline view. This particular chunk of text is, again, typically bold, big, and a certain font, but it shows up as normal. But if we actually utilize the heading style, then we start to see the structure begin to take shape. So now we have a heading 1, and if we went through this entire document and made it proper, you would have the balance of that structure there as well. Appropriate alternative text. I think Bethan touched upon this at the end, obviously, of her presentation as well, but we've seen a lot of very poor and inappropriate or insufficient descriptions for text, alternative text versions, such as this picture of a student. That's great, but what is the student doing? Where is he at? And why is that image even in the document to begin with? Is it meant to convey some kind of meaning? So in this case, a more appropriate would be, a postgraduate engineering student working in the new electron microscope lab. It's very important, again, going back to the subject matter experts as well, that you give a true representation of why that image is there, what it means, what its purpose is, what it's meant to convey. If it's not sufficient, or if there's nothing to say about it, then it should be marked as a decorative element or an artifact. The last little bit I'll touch upon is color contrast. It's often overlooked, especially within documents. And this is, again, for the vast majority of agencies and organizations, they have thousands and thousands of PDF documents. In hindsight, color contrast should have been addressed in the original document format. It's much easier to change there versus in the PDF. It is possible in the PDF, but it requires some extra effort and is more time consuming. But everybody loves to make a nice table, do the shaded rows, style it up to make it all look good visually. But that oftentimes gives adverse effects when we bring in color contrast values to check. So when building a document, be mindful of that. Your table shadings or even your heading shades, such as I've shown here. They've used a very faint blue with a knockout white text. None of those satisfy the contrast requirements. And it's just something, again, that's often overlooked and really needs to be addressed. Another aspect is not really contrast, but color used to convey meaning. So see the red box below or some reference of that sort. Again, should be not, you should not necessarily use color to convey meaning in any way. So that's another contrast or a color related issue that should be taken into consideration when building your documents. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
Great. Thanks, Hyde. It's really a great talk, and it's really important for people to understand some of the back-end technologies of accessibility. You know, you made the great point. You can make something look like a header or make something look like a title, but it won't be recognized as a title unless you're using some of the tools, you know, not only in Word, but in other content creation platforms. That if you're not using that functionality, then it's not going to be recognized by the systems.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been in this space now for about 6 years, and you know, over the course of those 6 years, I've really engaged with a lot of, you know, a lot of visual impaired people and otherwise cognitive and motor skill issues as well. And it was just astounding to me, the things typically taken for granted, and to just really think about the way that we consume content today. It's very different. People that are not necessarily familiar in this space think about read aloud functionality or even an audiobook type of reference. I've had customers come and ask, well, can we just create an audiobook of it? Well, that's fine. And yes, it's a way for certain groups to be able to consume that content. But again, an audiobook is really I think of an audiobook as something you listen to in your car as you're, you know, on your way to work or something. It doesn't necessarily provide the means for granular content consumption in the way that a lot of us are consuming content today. So as a result, I came up with this slide. It's just a very stark difference in what an unstructured or a non-compliant document, how it's consumed or how it's presented through the various assistive technologies. It's nothing more than a running string of text. There's much more that can be done with the structured document. And it's very similar to web pages. It's no different really to a web page. It needs that structure and all of the various attributes for the assistive technologies to really make use of it.
And what about things like bibliographic indices or databases? How do we build in accessibility, or are there different types of rules or approaches for providing information in those structures? Are there different kind of challenges involved in those?
References are a challenge. And I'll speak within a document that even citations, there's a lot of, what was it we were doing? We were doing a lot of legal documents, and, you know, there's, again, a lot of things being cited, and the way that a citation is read is quite tricky. You know, again, as a cited, anybody reading that type of document would typically know how to read that style of a citation, but to vocalize it, you know, it was a bit of a challenge to come up with an adequate solution to vocalize that same citation, especially in the document format as well, because certain characters, especially in PDF, are not natively read. So then you have to apply a span. I'm trying not to get too technical, but you have to wrap a span attribute around it and provide this actual text. What do you want the assistive technology to speak or present when that character when it comes across that character. And so it's really kind of an art when you get into different documents and different types of content, to really make this content usable. I'm a big advocate of making the documents usable, not just compliant. I typically say just enough is never enough. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I answered your question fully, but um, that was another challenging situation that we've gotten into.
Are there ways, and one of the elements of the last question, are there elements, say if you're working in a more of a database structure, how to build accessibility into those sort of services more so than documents?
Right. I mean, there I believe the database would have to work in concert with whatever front end, the user front end, that is basically serving that database information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the site itself or the portal itself would need to be properly, made accessible, and then the content that comes, um, it should be rendered in its, so there would be some considerations, I guess. But I would think a database type of environment, it's going to be returning um, known information. And again, as long as that portal is set up that when that information is presented, um, your portal is essentially going to be your template. And as long as the template is set up for accessibility, then the content is your variable data that just populates that template. And so I would think the consideration would need to be on the front end more so than the database data itself.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning of your talk, you went through some examples of the accessibility tool, the proofing tool.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asking about how the pricing structure for that service is set up. Is it based kind of on a per document? Is it a subscription service? Is it where can somebody get some more information about how that would work?
Sure. They can definitely reach out to me. My contact info is on the slides, but in general, we have two models that we provide, because the use cases that we've encountered, certain agencies or organizations, they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they just need this problem solved. So that's where we do have our service offering, which makes use of the product that we built to provide a white glove service. Send us the docs, we'll get it back. And that's typically a per page fee to do that type of work. But if an organization does have users that want to do this themselves, then they would license the platform. And that's where we do have two models for it as well. Kind of a subscription based, to where if you're not certain how many pages or how many users you might need on the platform, then you can basically subscribe to 100,000 pages or 20,000 pages, whatever the right size is. And that would be a bit of a threshold. Obviously, you could renew or boost up additional pages beyond that. The other is a user-based model. If you know you have 10 users and they're the only ones that are going to be doing the document remediation or all the text writing, then we do have a user-based model. We've tried to be flexible, certainly in the current situation that everybody's in today with the pandemic and everything. So it's why we've developed a couple different models that really seem to suit most anybody. Okay, but certainly can reach out to me, and we can have any further discussions.
Okay. Are there forums where these issues are discussed, and if someone wants more information, wants to get more involved, or maybe have staff who needs to be involved in this say there's staff that needs to be or should be involved in accessibility requirements and services on their platforms. Are there forums where you would direct people for how they should get engaged?
Yeah, why don't I follow up with the list of a few of those? I mean, it's good to know if you're going to be doing it yourself, then you really do need to understand the standard. So, I would immediately refer someone to, I mean, the WCAG standard is not an exciting read, but it is an important one because, again, it's important to make these documents usable and comply. So let me take that as an action item, and I can follow up with a few of those. Is that okay?
Great, thank you. So when we get those, we'll post those onto the website where we have additional resources related to this program.
All right.
All right. Well, Ian, I so appreciate you joining us, and thank you for your presentation, and particularly dialing in from India. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you, Todd.